actually has a fully owned subsidiary that's associated. And again, that is changing the legal links between entities. And then at the top of the pyramid, we have merger or acquisition. And it's important to recognize that a merger and an acquisition are different things. An acquisition is where a nonprofit may really only acquire a piece of another nonprofit, leaving the entity to either go on its own or dissolve. A merger is, in fact, the combination of entities. And when I say combination, I mean you're combining everything, both the sort of assets as well as any liabilities, as well as any sort of former risk or liability risk that the prior organization had undertaken. So we didn't want to do a deep dive in today's training around each one of these, but it's really important as nonprofit leaders to strengthen your own recognition that when someone says, hey, I want to collaborate, you don't say, I don't want to merge and walk away. Right? You don't want to have that like adverse reaction to be like, oh, I don't want to do the thing on the top of the pyramid. Well, in a lot of ways, what I want you to recognize is when someone says, hey, I'm interested in collaborating, realize there's so many different ways to do that and really try to keep a really open stance. And we'll talk more about that today, but you need to understand that these are tools, that these are structures, and that they're a means to an end. And we'll talk more about that as we go through today's session. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Cynthia to really start to dive in around the importance of leadership. Cynthia.
Thank you. So Anne just talked about how it's important to know some of the language and to understand the array of options that you have during while you're thinking about this. But also leaders at this time, as we saw in our poll and we see in the data, they're also there's a lot on their mind. And so there's a lot of things going on. And what we are recognizing is that, in fact, every journey of partnering or the thought of partnering really has to start with the leader of the organization. And there's some work to be done. Oftentimes what we're hearing is that partnerships within the nonprofit sector are perceived negatively. We hear all types of stories about people saying, well, I don't want my organization to be swallowed, or I don't want to lose my job. But as leaders, we are also bringing our own set of core assumptions and beliefs that can adversely impact the process, even during just a discussion phase. Also, as leaders, you will be potentially having these conversations when you go back to your senior leadership team. You may now start thinking about other people you can have the conversation with. And so it is important because they're going to go through the same process of, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be swallowed. I like our mission. Why can't we just exist the way we've been existing? And it is your job to hold space, right? So we feel that if we talk about what some core assumptions you are sitting with, and we can help you understand, again, the array of options you have, that in fact, you would then be able to take this conversation elsewhere. So we're going to break out actually and have about a 10-minute breakout session. And here's what we want to do. We want groups of, I think there are 3 or 4 that are coming together to talk about 3 things. First, you're going to want to introduce yourselves because you might be with new people, the other people you're meeting today. And then we want you to ask 3 questions. What comes to mind when you think about strategic alliances and partnerships? And you're going to want to be honest, right? And it's okay to say, I haven't thought about it. Nothing comes to mind. But let's talk about that because people hear things and it becomes part of our belief system. What are your core assumptions or beliefs or prior experiences that inform your perspective? And then finally, the most important question is, what would it take for you to consider a deeper partnership if you found it to be strategically and financially viable? What would it take for you to think about moving forward? Okay, I think Monica's going to help us. And then lastly, before we go, I asked that the group assign a representative because we may ask for you to bring back the highlights of your conversation, put them in chat, And we're going to ask for some volunteers to talk to us about what they heard in their group. Monica?
Monica's going to tee up the other tip I'll give you is just take a quick picture of the slide to take the questions with you. I also put them in the chat, but off everyone goes.
Sorry, go Monica, I heard, and that was it. So.
Oh no, that's totally fine.
It's all good.
It's just it's a little tip sometimes just for people to actually take a picture of the questions with their phone before they go.
Yeah.
How many rooms do we have?
It looks like 17.
That's great.
Okay. All right. Are we all back? Yes. All right. We are all back. Our hope is that you got to meet some new people and you got to hear some answers or learn some things about our core assumptions regarding partnerships and strategic alliances. So we're going to start with volunteers. Do we have a representative or two from a group that want to share some of the highlights that came from either of the three questions? What comes to mind when you think about alliances? What are your core assumptions and beliefs? And what would it take to consider a deeper partnership if it was viable for your organization? So do we have any volunteers? And you can go ahead and just unmute yourself and tell us your name.
Hi, I'm Dana Barcelos Allen, and I'm with Operation Fuel. We're the energy charity in Hartford that covers all of Connecticut. And I was in with Bob, and we were talking about, strategic alliances or partnerships is something that Operation Fuel does across the state already. But one of the things that Bob in our breakout room brought up was the fact that, these things are much easier if you have a shared mission. And so if you have the shared mission, you're 50% of the way toward your goal already, right? And then you get into the sort of nitty gritty. One of his things and some of his experiences has been the merger, and then what happens with two different boards of directors, and then how that plays out and how the choices, what kind of choices you make there and what you put into trying to pick the right people for that. And then because my background is also marketing, I talked a little bit about branding, and when you have that merger, does the brand of one, overtake the other? And then how do you talk about and sort of merge that when you're looking at reputation, when you're looking at history, when you're looking at places where you have a lot of volunteer or donor buy-in, and then you have that sort of thing, and some of the challenges that can come for that. But I hadn't put a lot of thought into this, but it's definitely an interesting topic, and something to think about heading down this unknown COVID road, and kind of where we're going, and how we can all stay viable financially. So thanks for that.
I appreciate that, Dana. And I love that you started with this idea, you and your breakout partner, this idea of shared mission, right? So we're finding, again, when you're bringing it to the board, right, making it about mission and impact really helps to shift the conversation, because board members are going to come up with everything you just said.
I'm the mysterious Bob, by the way.
Oh, hi, Bob.
I just wanted to add one thing, and that is that I'm a consultant, and I do a lot of work with strategic planning. And I worked with a number of clients where we have had collaborations, and some have ended up with merger. And my experience is that the strategic planning process is very important to this, so that it should be part of a much larger look at the organization.
Yeah.
And
I love that idea.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, because we're going to walk into the unknown, and so that becomes dysregulating for some individuals. Thank you for that. I also want to invite folks to put in comments in the chat. What were some things that you and your partners talked about in your breakout rooms? But do we have another volunteer who wants to share highlights of their conversations? And just unmute yourself and come on, because it's harder to see. Okay. And those are the three questions. So what comes to mind when you think of strategic alliances? What are your personal core assumptions? And what would it take for you to consider a deeper partnership if it was viable?
Okay, I'll talk for our group. This is Marcia. So I met with David, Debbie, and Michaela. We all talked about the fact that we're, struggling with things, and that this was a topic we were interested in. I shared that we actually just went through a merger and have been merged with another organization for about a year. And FIO Partners was the group that helped us with that. So we did a lot of sharing of information. Although we didn't come up with a strategic plan, it was pretty close to a strategic plan, and the merger was successful. So I really appreciated their support on that. We talked a little bit about the back office support that might be helpful for some of us, that, that is for small organizations, that takes a lot of our resources, and that might be interesting to explore.
Yeah, so something like an MSO.
Yeah, and this is David. If I could just jump into add to that, Marcia, that's a great report. Part of the appeal of providing the back office support is also to help deal with a very understandable fear on the part of a smaller organization of being swallowed up and losing its independence. And the back office support is a way of supporting the brand and the independence and the strength of the organization without depriving it of who it is and how it's been doing things.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Thank you. Does anybody want to take us through what came up when the question was asked, what would it take to consider a deeper partnership? Leaders. Okay, we got something in the chat. One organization was already engaged in collaborations. One organization, oh, I lost the rest of the chat. Sorry.
I got it, Sim.
Okay, can you read that?
Yeah, so David shared that one organization was engaged in a collaboration, one just went through a strategic planning process, and one was a part of that process was to begin the discussion of who they might collaborate with. And another talked about shared services. And I think in a lot of ways, I really do though want to come back to Cynthia's question, which is, for those of you that are engaging in these discussions, what is it taking of you? What are some of your expectations when you're engaging in these discussions? Thank you, Kathy Ziner, in capital letters, trust with an exclamation point. This is about relationships, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through today's session. Part of what we need you to recognize as leaders, and I'm going to just kind of keep us moving, Cynthia, so we can kind of get into some of the tools of the day and other things we want to touch on together is, when you wrangle with that question, which is what would it take for you or your organization to consider a deeper alliance? I really want you to actually write down that list, because you may write down things that are things like, I'd really want to know the person really well, or I'd want our board members to work together to create a shared vision for what's possible. I'd really want to have good communication and engagement of the other party. I wouldn't want to set up a meeting and have somebody cancel it 5 minutes before. I'd want the organization to be willing and able to participate in an intentional, thoughtful process. But what you have to realize is what's true for your list is most likely also true for your partner. So really being cognizant of your own behavior and the behavior of your potential partner from the moment that these discussions begin. Really understanding, do you have the capacity to really consider an alliance right now? Recognizing that it will take time, and we'll talk more about that. But this is really this understanding that this starts with you as leaders, and thinking about what you would need to move through this type of process, and recognizing that your partner will most likely have very similar needs. So here's where we want to pivot. One of the things that has brought you to today's session, and many of you are here and on the line with us this morning because you are concerned about your future. You may even be concerned about your current state. And so one of the things that we advise clients around is that this is in fact the starting point for your strategic alliance work. Often we'll talk with clients and they'll say, I've been talking to this potential partner for like 2 years and we can't get the discussion off the dime, or we were talking to someone and it didn't go anywhere and I'm not really sure why. And so what we need to start with is this recognition that as leaders, your first obligation is to your own entity and your own mission as the starting place. So as a leader, it's about making sure that you and your board have a good understanding of your current and future organizational health. So I'm going to ask Betsy to pop a link back into the chat. What we'd like to do in this section of the session this morning is just introduce some tools to you that we believe can help you build a greater understanding of where you are today and what's unfolding for you for the future. And so, today again is not going to be a deep dive into these tools, but we didn't want you to leave this morning without some actually really tangible things that you can actually go do within the next few weeks with your board and staff. So the first is really an early warning tool. So one of the things that we have found is that boards of directors are waiting too long to make decisions about strategic alliances. They are in some ways depleting reserves, potentially having to cease or close programs. And the challenge with that is that if that is the case, when you begin to engage in a partnership or a partnership discussion, you really may have waited too long, meaning that your programs aren't able to be run, or you really are on the verge of closure and you've waited too long to develop a strategy to protect what you're doing. And so with the early warning tool is it has a couple components. And the first piece of it is really around your financial health. I don't know if any of you remember, the teen magazines where you would do a quiz and you would get a score. So like 1 to 5, you were a really good friend, 5 to 8, you were only a mediocre friend, and 8 to 10, you were just a bad friend, right? And so one of the things that we've realized is that we have got to make this as easy as possible for boards and leaders to get their heads around how is your organization doing financially. So the early warning tool has really sort of 2 components of it. The first is really around financial health. And it's really looking at trends in your financial data, both in the last couple of years and some basically early stage projections. And we'll talk a little bit more about financial projections and financial forecasting in a couple minutes. But this is really a tool to help you begin to look at a series of financial indicators and see if they warrant, in some ways, a deeper and intentional process around either retrenchment or consolidation. When we talk about retrenchment, it really is kind of calling the question is, should my organization just be smaller right now through this time? Or should I actually consider a consolidation and merging with another entity to really protect my programmatic work? And so again, that's what the early warning tool is for. It's a great tool to use both with CEOs and with boards. And we've given a link to all of these tools in the chat, and you can kind of download each one. In addition to that, with the other part of the tool is it's looking at financials, and then it's also looking at programmatic health. How are your programs faring? How competitive are your programs? What are some elements in terms of strengths and opportunities around your programmatic portfolio? Again, what we're recognizing and wanting you to have a conversation about is really how are we doing? What parts of our organization are viable as we look ahead to the future? And so you've got to put the kind of financial conversation and the programmatic conversation together and to deeply look at it as a board and CEO and say, what should we be thinking about? And so based on the results of this in some ways and your own understanding of your current position, you can begin to think about how could a strategic alliance be helpful to us? Howard's jumping in and with some agreement around that sometimes board and management wait too long. And then they become a less attractive partner for another organization. What I want us to think about though, and maybe this is in less, I don't want to simplify this too much, that this is just about finance and just about program. Nonprofits have other assets that may or may not be captured in the tool, which are things like relationships with community members, access to community members, geographic presence and location. So as much as these tools, this one tool, the early warning tool, can help start the conversation, it is not the entire conversation, right? And so, you know, I agree with you, we can wait too long for a potential partner to be financially less attractive, but I want us to recognize that partnership is not always about resources and it's not always about assets. Nonprofits have a lot of other assets that in fact should be protected, cultivated, and supported, and in fact amplified through a potential partnership. So anyway, that's the early warning tool. We've given it to you as a handout. But the other piece of this on the current state side, so if we're looking at programs, we're looking at financials, the other tool that we've given you is a relationship mapping tool. So the other piece that we can do a deep dive on as a board and staff is really almost a relationship stock taking. We recognize that partnerships tend to emerge out of pre-existing working relationships. So we've actually given you a template to actually capture the ecosystem of relationships that exist for your organization. And so this is handout 2. And this is an Excel spreadsheet. This is not a complicated tool. This is about actually capturing those relationships and bringing maybe a different lens to them. So who do you refer to? Who refers to you? Who are your competitors? Who are the peer organizations in the state that you partner with? Are you part of an association or a network of other organizations that are similar to you? It's important to recognize that a potential partnership will most likely emerge out of a pre-existing relationship. So we've got to take the time to take stock of those relationships, right? So we've done program, we've done finance, now we're thinking about the relationships. And so how does this all start to come together? Where we start with is impact. So today's session is really kind of wanting to send a message to you as leaders that if you are engaging in a strategic alliance, you have got to know your own why. What is the impact that you are hoping to have as an organization in the next few years? It's not just next week, it's the next sort of 2 to 3 years. What are you hoping to achieve? The use of strategic alliances and partnerships is ultimately a means to an end. If you are not clear about your end, you will never be clear in these conversations. So what we want to do is just give you a few minutes to kind of take this in, and we're going to put you again into small groups. And I want you to think about impact. I want you to think about the work that your organization is aspiring to do, the impact that you're hoping to have, and push yourself to say, how clear am I about that question? Because in so many ways, you have got to be clear about what you are hoping to do before you engage in these discussions. It's incredibly important and really is the first step. So I'm going to look to Monica and sort of check in with her to see if we're ready to go to breakouts. We're actually going to give you just about 5 to 6 minutes to engage with each other. You're going to do groups of 3 to 4. And I want you to really be thinking about, you know, how are you envisioning the work that you're hoping to do in the next couple of years, all right? So this is the opening question around thinking about alliances, to lead with the work. So Monica, we'll send them off and we'll see you in just about 6 to 7 minutes. I think we can give a tiny bit more time.
Would be great. I know I'm working on something that we have to do soon, and I'm trying to think about how to set it up so that it can be engaging. So thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, not at all, not at all. Happy to jump in. We're all getting very used to how to do this.
Well, the other thing that I find interesting is that, you know, there's this competition between Zoom and Teams, and they're all trying to add features that will, you know, make them more user friendly to different groups. So at first you thought you were going to switch to one, but now I feel like, you know, you really have to have both.
Yeah,
so
well, look.
Take advantage.
Well, we just want to say welcome back to everyone. I'd love just to take a moment to see if anyone would like to share a couple of the highlights from their discussions about sort of their aspirations around impact in the current year. What's on your mind as you think ahead? Anybody want to kind of jump in and just unmute themselves? We'll do our best to sort of kind of wave a hand and then unmute yourself to join us.
Hi, this is Michaela.
Hey, Michaela, welcome.
Hi. So I work at a nonprofit organization as the executive director called Advocacy Unlimited. We're a
Yep.
peer-led nonprofit, meaning we're all in recovery from mental health, addiction, and trauma. And we use that lived experience coupled with education and training to inform systems transformation, protect human rights, and promote individual growth. And looking ahead over the next 2 years, we can very much see that there's a great need for space to be created for people to feel seen, heard, and valued, and begin to process the unusual circumstances that we found ourselves in with COVID, among many other social justice issues. And we're at a very pivotal time in our society. And so when we look ahead, Advocacy Unlimited really sees that we can be of service to the community. We're offering one-to-one peer support and different groups for people who are seeking to process the stress that they may be navigating, while also offering the holistic approaches to stress management as an alternative to psychiatric clinical care. And we hope to continue to foster dialogues throughout communities and with partners who are interested in unpacking maybe their beliefs about what mental health traditionally looks like and the clinical approach to care. And so that's what we look forward to moving, in the future. And, that's what really brought me to this webinar, as we think about partnering. And then a highlight is to not, Kathy, who was on the call with me from Granby, which Granby is a great community if anybody's looking to relocate. She really shared about not wanting to duplicate services, but putting, your mission into action while not duplicating what's already available. And I think that that's a real concern as we have greater fiscal restraints. And that also speaks to the need for strategic partnerships. So thank you for giving me a chance to share.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that, Michaela. I think what we recognize is that there are not a lot of forums that exist for nonprofits to kind of share their answer to this question. And in so many ways, that is how partnerships emerge. So Michaela, thank you for sharing that. You were chatting, you're not on video, but I was seeing some other interested folks who were sort of like, maybe I could see it in people's heads. Maybe I should reach out to Michaela. Maybe we would be a good partner to kind of chat and learn more about each other's work. But I think what's powerful in what you shared is your own clarity about what you're hoping to accomplish. And so it really does change the conversation when you know as a leader where you believe your organization can add value, where it can be helpful to a potential partner, and again, leaning into that sort of shared vision or shared mission for the work around what you're trying to accomplish. And that is really, I think, the seeds of potential partnership really get really fed in that kind of environment. So thanks for sharing. Would anyone else like to share a highlight from their discussion or their group discussion really about impact? Jonathan.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Katz from Playhouse on Park. I'm the company business manager there, and we might be the poster child for this seminar because we've partnered with at least 4 different organizations to put on performances and live entertainment because we're restricted from having people in our theater. And we've partnered with Our Farm. One of my breakouts was with Erica Fern of Our Farm. To great success, Dunkin' Donuts Park, Hillstead Museum, and even all the way down in Newtown, even though we're less located in West Hartford, where we put on a drive-in movie of a play that we produced. So
awesome.
It's really great, but there's our core strength really is we're full of people that are creative and have immense talent. And anybody looking to do anything, whether it's fundraising or any other type of an event that where entertainment could be a part of, that is a perfect opportunity to partner with us, because we have people who are not working, need the work, and we produce all our own shows. We produce events. For many, many years, we co-chaired the Mayor's Charity Ball in West Hartford. We know how to produce events, and we know how to make things work, and we know how to raise money. So I think our skill set would fit with almost any other nonprofit that is looking to make an impact in something that we can help with. And
Great.
this winter, when we can't do things outside, we'll be available.
Awesome. Jonathan, thank you so much. And thank you for being a real life example of what we talk about, the strategic pivot, and taking your assets and really using them in a different way during this time. I will also echo that emergent idea of arts and culture organizations that have access to stage, lighting, sound. They know those things. They know them really well. And nonprofits who want to do events and engage their communities as a potential match made in heaven as we think about this next 6 to 8 months and 9 months. And so, Jonathan, thank you so much for being a real life example of that really, really kind of way of bringing our assets together in new ways. Thanks so much. So I'm going to keep us going. Want to make sure we hit a few couple of kind of ideas and points before we open it up for general Q&A. So I'm just going to kind of keep us moving forward in the time we have together. So we talked about this need to lead with impact. We talked about this need to be clear about your own work, your strengths, what you hope to accomplish with the community that you serve. There are 2 other tools that we really want to take a minute to introduce that can really help you build what I call leadership alignment around the future that you face. The first is scenario planning. And so within scenario planning, what we've done in the handouts is giving you a fantastic article that is probably my favorite around what if. It's an article that really lays out a process for you to think about the major drivers behind your business model, the major forces that are going to impact your work, and to actually begin to explore a range of scenarios. So what scenario planning lets us do is make the unknown known. So let's, so some major forces for some organizations may be the potential recession. Either there is one or there isn't one. Whether or not people are willing to be in person in any type of size, or they're not. And with that, you can actually create a 2x2, which is thereby kind of 4 stories potentially emerge that, yes, there's a recession, but we get a vaccine early, which means people are getting together in Q1 and Q2 of next year. People aren't getting together, and there is a recession. What does that look like for you? And what's that story that we would need to tell? Cynthia and I agree that storytelling is a fantastic way for us to envision, what is that worst case scenario that we don't get a vaccine until, December of 2021, and there's a recession. So what does that mean for you, for your business, for those you serve? What can you expect to see happen? So scenario planning is a really powerful tool to take a group through the kind of what would our options be? What would our reaction be to that story if that story were to come to pass, right? So scenario planning is a very powerful tool. The other tip that we want to give you is we've given you the early warning tool. But we do also think that financial forecasting is another way to begin to think about those scenarios. So if you can kind of get your head around the possibilities for the coming year, the following year, you can actually begin to say, and what would happen to our financials? And how do I build some alignment around what we think may happen on the financial front going forward, given what may happen in our environment? So we've dropped it, and Cynthia, I'm going to have you drop that FMA link. So FMA is a colleague consulting firm nationally. We think this is the best set of resources around financial forecasting. There's a lot of tools and templates and ways to think about that challenge for your organization. And again, part of this is getting leadership alignment around a recognition of what is known, what remains unknown, and getting really comfortable with, as best that we can guess, what the unknown may unfold in front of us. We then can actually take action and prepare to address it. And we raise both of these tools in the context of strategic alliances because who you are today may be, in fact, not who you are 6 months from now or a year from now. And so we've got to begin to help you understand what does that sort of next year look like and potentially beyond. What are the changes that you're making today to your business model that might, in fact, not change and not go away and actually become part of your business? And so it is kind of beginning to wrap your head around, as a leader, I need to know how we're doing today, but I really need to be envisioning the potential futures of my organization as I potentially seek to engage partnerships. And I think, as I potentially think about engaging potential partners, how clear can I be about the possible futures for our organization? So with that, I'm going to kind of, again, keep us moving in the interest of time. This is as fast-paced as we can make this, and lean into some tips and things to think about in terms of moving forward. And then we're going to try to leave some time for Q&A before we close out today. So in terms of moving forward, what we want you to realize is when you've got a good understanding of your current state, you've begun to envision your future as an entity, you have options. All right, and strategic alliances are not like a one-size-fits-all type of kind of approach or strategy. You've got to recognize that if you are financially vulnerable, I want you to deeply look at your programming. I want you to look at your financials. I want you to think about the future financial position of your organization. I want you to think about, do we need to be smaller to in some ways stay viable through this period of time? That's retrenchment. Do we need to consider a partnership to help us either with expenses, to amplify our programming, to do joint fundraising with another organization? How can a partnership help us sustain what we're doing as we look ahead? Or lastly, if you are gravely concerned about your ability to continue to deliver what you're delivering, I want you to begin to recognize that you could seek a partner for consolidation. Particularly smaller organizations that have anywhere from sort of 2 to 5 programs, it really may make sense for you to partner with a larger entity. And what I want you to think about is that is about protecting your work. That is about protecting your community, those that you serve, and that consolidation is not failure. It is a way to protect and amplify what you do. That's on the financially vulnerable side. If you're a larger organization or even a small organization that's doing well right now, partnership is about strategy. How do we maintain our operations? How do we think about partnership, collaboration, potential merger with other smaller organizations to make our work stronger, to be more impactful, to expand our geographic region, to bring new services to our clients? This is about the work. We do not recommend engaging in types of partnerships like this if you are financially vulnerable. It's a tricky thing to try and do. But if you are in a good place and you're looking to the future and consider yourself to be a stronger entity, I want you to be thinking about those that you serve and how a partnership could in fact strengthen what you're doing. And all the way on the right side, if you just think this is a really interesting idea, you're doing okay, or even if you're kind of like, I'm not sure how we're doing, I want you to look at your work. Where could a partnership help strengthen your programs, strengthen what you're doing for those you serve, and really work on that internal clarity piece of work as you're thinking about opportunities? All right, so with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Cynthia to kind of talk about, so where in the world do we start?
Yeah, so, we've done a lot today, and we started this presentation saying it starts with you, right? Because now you go back to your organization and you are going to begin, if this is something of interest to you, begin having these conversations with your leadership team and with your board members. And if you start doing the math, some of you have large boards. You have 10 other people to have this conversation with, or 20 other people. And excuse me, board engagement is key throughout the entire process. It could break down at any point of the process if you have not board members with you along the way. So make sure that when you're having these conversations, they join you in assessing the current situation, or you are providing updates as to what is your current situation? Have them help you and work with you on determining the types of partnerships that you can seek. Let them be part of the co-creating process so that you bring them along all the way through. And then even selecting potential partners, your board members can help you with that. And you can have really great conversations about why that partner would be a good partner or a not so good partner. And then finally, have the boards be part of bringing the whole thing through fruition. You shouldn't be doing this in isolation, and you shouldn't be thinking of your board as just people you're going to bring in and out throughout the process, but really engage them and create a deeper partnership with your board so that you can move this along. Again, it starts with you, your core assumptions, doing that work so that now when you talk to your board members, you can help bring them along because they're going to have the same questions, the same doubts, and the same core assumptions that you've had.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Cynthia. And I'll just echo that well-intentioned board members come to this work with good intentions. Given, to Cynthia's point, their own assumptions about this, experiences that they have had, how they behave in these discussions is not always helpful. And so you really do need to do the upfront work with them before you negotiate something with another CEO, push it towards the finish line, and your board is like, what? No, we're not doing this. Your board takes deep responsibility and ownership, as they should, around the future of your entity. And you have got to engage them from the beginning. Not to be a record on this issue, but let's just say Cynthia and I have seen it go wrong too many times.
Yes.
So how do we do that? So handout 4 is actually a set of key preparatory questions for board members. So we have actually given you a handout where you can actually start to engage your board in a series of questions, which are about how is the environment changing? What does that mean for us? What are we trying to accomplish right now? And how could a partnership help us get there? You know, oftentimes, again, CEOs and even board members may kind of plot these partnerships out without engaging the board. We've given you a discussion guide that gets the conversation started so that we can get on the same page about what we're doing, what are we seeing in the environment, and how could a partnership help us? So that when you show up at the next sort of subcommittee meeting and say, you know, we talked about the potential for support around our management services. I've got an organization that I think could help us, that your board isn't looking at you sideways going, you're giving away the entity, you're giving away the whole thing. Like, you know, or the random board member, it's like, I've been through a corporate takeover, we shouldn't talk to anybody. And again, well-intentioned, just less helpful. So again, I want you to kind of think about, how do I help my board? And some of you may say, my board doesn't know enough. That is in fact your responsibility. Your board needs to know enough because at the end of the day, if you are going to change the legal structure of your entity, they have to approve it. And so if they do not know enough, you need to start today. And to Cynthia's point, engaging them in this assessment about where you are today, where you're going in the future, and how this could make sense is a critical part of the learning process that a board needs to go through to, at the end of the day, in fact, approve these types of transactions.
Yeah.
Cynthia.
And we can't stress enough the importance of relationships. In one of the tools that we gave you, the relationship mapping tool, you know, we have you map out the people that you work with, the partners that you have already. But it also helps you to consider, although you may have a lot of partners that you trust and you have relationships with, you probably only have a handful that you would want to engage in this journey with. So the relationship mapping tool helps you do that. But one of the things you want to think about is, who do you have high trust with, right? And who do you have in deep relationships? Because these conversations through the process are very difficult. And there are ebbs and flows. And sometimes there's tension. And that's when the relationship and the trust comes into play. So make sure that as you work working and talking with your board, that you're also dissecting the partnerships and relationships you have, and seeing which ones you have a higher trust level with than others that you might want to engage with.
And I'll just drive home the point on this slide, and then I want Cynthia to talk more about trust in so many ways. But
Yeah.
the key here is to choose some relationships that you may need to cultivate. So there's the mapping, there's the who do we have trusting relationships. And then I like to see organizations really choose a short list and say, you know what, we have 50 different relationships. It's these 3 that matter most to what we're trying to do. And so what is cultivating these relationships actually need to look like? So it's not just the prioritizing, it is in fact, who do we trust? And then it's actually about saying, where are we going to invest some intentional time to build that relationship and move it forward?
Yes, I love that, Anne. Thank you.
So Cynthia, let's talk a little more about trust.
Yeah, so trust, and you know, Anne can definitely add experiences that we've had here, but you want to be with people on this journey who, one, you are willing to be honest with, who will be honest with you, and who you would have disagreement with, and you'll be able to push through that disagreement. And also people who share similar values. Values are really important to people. And if that doesn't come out in conversation, it could break down a little bit later in the road. So trust in this situation has 3 components that you want to think about. The first one is competence. And that's the belief that the partner that you're choosing is fully capable of making a significant and meaningful contribution to the accomplishment of the expectations of your joint partnership. That's also true for you. Are you capable of also bringing to the table and making a significant contribution that's meaningful to the end product? Communication is also very key. Again, these things break down at many points, and we just pick them up and we work through them. But the belief that the word of the spokesperson can be taken at face value, and that spokesperson is truthful, and that they perceive you as truthful. So that's another component. And then contractual, right? Trust in action, the belief that a partner will, in fact, follow through on promises made. We use the example of, if you're having meetings and you're going to bring the boards together, or you're going to bring the executive board members together on Tuesday at 3:30, and the board members do not show up, what does that do to the trust factor? These are things you want to consider, and it plays on both sides. Trust is built over time, but it can also erode over time. And, you know, Anne and I like to joke, because we are in New England, you know, one of our values is that we don't forget anything. And, you know, we'll have a board member say, well, you know, I don't like that partner. I don't like that organization because 30 years ago, they XYZ, and gotten that, and they're not a good partner. So you want to be careful about that as well. So you can see this is a process, right? And it's really, really important to follow through and show up, because again, trust, while we can establish it in the beginning and build over time, we can also lose it in the beginning, or it can erode over time. We cannot overemphasize this point.
Yeah, and I think Cynthia is driving this home, but the reality is that as human beings, you are always going to be watching for behaviors that in fact either reinforce high trust or erode trust. And you may misinterpret signals. So those board members who all didn't show up at the same time, you could be like, well, that board doesn't care about us. And maybe we shouldn't do this deal, you know? And again, it's sort of like, we tend to read the tea leaves when we start partnership discussions. And again, it's sort of like, is that actually accurate? And so you've got to kind of watch your own kind of reaction sometimes to these kinds of signals, and make sure you're asking good questions of your partners. But I think Cynthia also makes this point that this is about time. I want you to think about what the next year is going to look like for us, and internally here at FIO, July and September are the new January in terms of being in in-person meetings. That means if you're thinking about a partnership, it likely will get negotiated over Zoom. And I just want us to recognize that Zoom is no pastry in the back of the room. Zoom is no coffee shop. Zoom is no, hey, I'll just meet you on the corner and chat with you for a little bit. The Zoom is intentional. People are hard to read. You can misinterpret people's behavior. So what I need you to understand is that these combinations, these partnerships, this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a 2-hour Zoom meeting. And you've got to make sure as you look to engage in this work that you can dedicate some time to it, that it is of substantive importance to your organization for board and your own time, that you are willing to invest in what it will take to develop the relationships to bring a partnership to fruition. It is about trust. That trust emerges typically over time spent together, envisioning what does not yet exist. And so with that, we've got a few minutes left. We want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. We want you to know, and Mayor really has been encouraging this throughout, you are not alone in this work. There is the opportunity for funding to really support you in a number of ways, whether it's training for you and your board around what is this topic and what does it look like and how do you do it. Building internal clarity as to why you would consider a partnership. How does it fit with your own vision and mission and what you're aspiring to achieve? We have supported organizations, and consultants can support you around partner search and feasibility. There are some instances where you really may not know who to partner with, and you can actually conduct a formal RFP process to find a partner from a set of existing partners who may be interested in a deeper partnership. You can do partnership design, really what is it that you're creating and building. You can also get support with what does the agreements look like, and actually supporting implementation and transition planning depending on what kind of structure it is. So, we just want you to know that, there are consultants that can support you, and certainly the NSP program, I think, can be supportive to you to fund what we would kind of say are early stage efforts to bring these types of partnerships to fruition. And so oftentimes as a firm, in our history, we've been involved anywhere from doing a strategic plan where strategic alliances becomes part of it, through to partnership and feasibility, all the way through implementation. And so again, depending on your organization and the kind of support you're seeking, NSP and certainly other consultants can provide this kind of support as you're looking ahead. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes left. We've given you a lot to think about, I hope, in this 2-hour together, but I'm going to kind of do a stop share and just open it up to the group for any questions that you may have. And again, I think at this point, you can maybe unmute yourself or drop a question in the chat, and we'll just create some space to answer any questions that people have. We've covered a lot of ground in an hour and 50 minutes.
We have.
Any questions that you might have? Claire, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, my question is having to do with your views of an acquisition of an entity that may be perhaps a for-profit entity that you bring under you convert to a nonprofit, or if you've seen partnerships like that, or the startup of an organization that would be under the umbrella, like a new enterprise under your nonprofit, that would be basically a new startup entity that's a separate perhaps entity under your nonprofit. I know I'm being a little bit vague. I'm in.
Nope, you're doing fine. So basically the idea would be create like an earned income, but do it as a for-profit subsidiary owned by the nonprofit.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of like millions of well, not, I shouldn't say millions, but a lot of different scenario planning, of different scenarios of how we can carry out our mission.
Yeah, the answer absolutely is yes. So what I like to say about strategic alliances and partnerships is that it really is a blank canvas. And the legal structures are a means to accomplish something. And so if the idea is to create unrestricted earned revenue for what it would basically be a wholly owned for-profit subsidiary of a nonprofit, you can build that. That is possible to build. So if you think about the why is unrestricted revenue. The how is a for-profit subsidiary owned by the C3. So I've absolutely seen it done before. The one place, the one example I have seen it, the way I've seen it done in the industry, it was that a C3 actually created a real estate development company that was a separate for-profit entity.
Mm-hmm. And was that, did they do that through an acquisition, or was that a startup enterprise? Sorry,
that was a startup enterprise that they created. Yep, it was a startup enterprise they created themselves. We also have seen joint ventures where 2 to 3 nonprofits can come together to actually create a for-profit enterprise that they are in fact the owners of. So we've seen an example of that where a medical records company was created, but the owners of that company were 3 nonprofits that started off serving themselves with the medical record and then spun that out to support other nonprofits.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I like to say there's a certain creativity to this.
Have you seen?
Hopefully that's helpful, Claire. Happy to discuss more if needed.
Anne, so this is Barry from Oak Hill, and having been in the field for 30 years and having done probably somewhere between 8 and 10 everything on your list, I like the statement you made about it being a blank canvas. You know, the way that that we have looked at this is it is about mission, and you can put these things together any way you want. The hardest thing we've found is people's willingness to actually come to the table and believe that you can put it together any way you want. Because, you know, if this is about how do you preserve your mission, how do you pay your employees more money, how do you allow for them to have benefits and preserve the services that are important to you, it becomes a pretty easy conversation. If it's about how do we maintain, you know, everything exactly as is, then it becomes a hard conversation. And so it's really got to be an openness to, you know, why are you coming together? And that, you know, the statement around trust and confidence in that, you know, is really important. So, and then the last thing I would recommend is keep the lawyers out of the discussions in the beginning, because the lawyers find risk everywhere and anywhere that they can. And if you're going to build trust and confidence in why you're doing this, it's a whole lot easier to do it without the lawyers in the room.
Yeah. Thanks,
I
Barry.
see Kathy Zeiner is cracking up there, Barry, when you said keep the lawyers out of the room in the beginning. Kathy must have a story.
It's not, it may not be a story to share publicly in this forum, but there may be a story there. We'll just like, this is hard work to do. I mean, again, I think it is hard work to do, Barry. And I think, you know, recognizing that lawyers are going to bring a different lens to this from the initial moment. Yeah, I'll just agree. I'll agree wholeheartedly.
Can I just add something? So in the chat, Betsy has put a link to a survey for this workshop. And if you could take a moment after the workshop or copy the link and fill out the survey, it's very important to the Hartford Foundation to hear your thoughts and get your feedback. Thank you, Betsy, for doing that. Sorry, Anne.
No, that's fine. Thanks for giving the survey the plug that it deserves. We really do want to hear from you. You know, we have been training on strategic alliances for quite some time. And I think, you know, we go back and forth between making sure people understand the technical aspects of this. But I think today's session and Cynthia's in some ways wonderful lens to this topic, which is that this is about you as leaders. Your ability to bring these things to fruition has more to do with you and your board than really the technical aspects of it. And so I hope that you found today helpful. Sonia just jumped in on the chat. All of the handouts as well as the slides from today's session will be posted to the NSP website. So we gave you that link earlier for today's handouts, but we'll make sure that the slides and the recording are also available. You can feel free to encourage board members to pick their favorite beverage and throw up the recording on a Saturday afternoon. And really just try and take it all in. But I think in a lot of ways, you know, the message here is that this does start with you. And we look forward and really have the honor of partnering with you to really begin to think about what could you envision that in fact doesn't exist yet. And that's really what these partnerships are. It's ways to come together to improve your work.
Betsy, put the link up again. So Sonia, you can pick that up and all the handouts.
Yeah.
Through that link.
Any other questions we can answer this morning? All right. Well, we will thank all of you for your time. We hope you found this to be a helpful session. We're just a phone call, email, or Zoom away. I will give a shout out to Cynthia. Thank you so much, my fellow presenter and colleague.
Oh, thank you, Anne.
We hope you've had a great morning together, and we look forward to seeing you again and stay in touch. Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.